thought you would do. See, there are times in life when little things change. And those little things might take you to a different location to where you were originally heading or where you thought you were heading. Sometimes these changes have a positive outcome. Sometimes they have a negative outcome. But have you ever wondered how those little changes happen, and again, how you ended up where you are? Today we're going to be delving into Galatians 2 in our series called Emerge. And I've called this talk Vigilant. What does vigilant mean? I heard alert, be on guard, yep. Keep all those kind of things in mind as we talk about this, because I'm not going to give you a definition. But this talk is about being aware of the small changes that can happen in our faith journeys and in our church journeys, and how they impact where we end up, for better or for worse. Now, you might think that you have a pretty good handle on your faith journey. And you might think you've got a pretty good handle on your faith story and even just your general life script at the moment. You might think back to last week when we talked about foundations and go, yeah, I know my foundations, I know what I believe, I know what my traps are, and I know what to look out for. You might feel like a pretty self-aware person. But today I'd like to suggest that we could possibly be letting more slip through our fingers than we think we do. I'm going to play a video clip for you now. And I know I've played this video clip in church before, so some of you will know what it is. Some of you have seen it before in other locations. But just humour me for a moment. Have you got your copyright screen on, Bob? No? I'll wait until you do that. And before, I don't want to get taken down again. New pattern of that thing that we never believed that we would be falling into. And so we're going to be starting this week where we left off last week. Good place to start, right? And we're going to be drilling down into our foundations. So Paul writes at the start of his letter in Galatians, he says, "Then 14 years later I went back to Jerusalem again, this time with Barnabas, and Titus came along too. I went there because God revealed to me that I should go. And while I was there, I met privately with those considered to be leaders of the church and shared with them the message I had been preaching to the Gentiles. I wanted to make sure that we were in agreement, for fear that all my efforts had been wasted and I was running the race for nothing. And they supported me and did not even demand that my companion Titus be circumcised, though he was a Gentile." So Paul here is confirming with the apostles, they're the leaders that they're talking about, he's confirming with the apostles or the disciples, whichever one, they're the same, that what he was sharing with the Gentiles, with people like us that weren't Jews, is indeed the good news of Jesus, that his foundations are right. And the apostles, they give him the all clear on the message that he was sharing, which, as I said, is the foundation message that we talked about last week. And then, it's almost this throwaway line at the end, when he says, they did not request or require Titus to become circumcised. So in other words, they didn't require him to come under Jewish law and do what the Jewish people had to do to be accepted as a follower of Jesus, because he was not a Jew. So according to the Jewish apostles, according to everyone else involved, He was accepted as a follower of Jesus and a worker for the gospel. Now, I would say, okay, that sounds great to me. Let's leave it there. But then Paul goes on to say that this was actually becoming a sticking point. So it's a throwaway line, not necessarily, but it's a bit of a throwaway line here at the end of this section. But he goes on to say this is really a sticking point for some people. In verse 4, he says, even that question around circumcision came up with the group that they were with only because some of the so-called believers there, false ones really, who were secretly brought in. They sneaked in to spy on us and to take away the freedom that we have in Christ Jesus. They wanted to enslave us and to force us to follow their Jewish regulations. But we refused to give in to them for a single moment. We wanted to preserve the truth of the gospel message for you. So the only reason that the question came up around Jewish law, the apostles didn't bring it up. They were fine with what was being preached. The only reason it came up was because there were infiltrators who wanted to change the gospel and conform it to Jewish law, to make it suit them and to suit their comfort levels. So some people of that day believed that you had to be a Jew to be a follower of Jesus. Who here is a Jew? Nothing wrong with Jews. You're allowed to admit it. Yeah, they are. That's right. They're believers too. But just because you're not a Jew doesn't mean you don't believe in Jesus. Am I correct? Who here believes in Jesus? It's kind of like if someone walked in here and said, oh, right, all you guys over here, we're going to do a little surgery to you. And all you ladies, you guys need to go over here and do whatever the Jewish ladies needed to do. Because otherwise you can't be in here. And you can't believe in the God that I believe in. But when we read that Paul and the others, they fought to preserve. It says that we refused to give in to them for a single moment. We wanted to preserve the truth of the gospel message for you. They fought to preserve the gospel so that the foundations of the gospel, the truth of Jesus, that he died on the cross for us, he wanted to make sure that what the Gentiles were hearing was truth. Not that they had to do something else. See, being a follower of Jesus isn't all peaches and cream, or if you prefer beer and Skittles, whatever you want, whatever mix match you want. But there are many, many teachings and beliefs out there that can throw you into muddied water. I'm not saying that I know all the answers or that I'm 100% right. What I'm saying is I'm going to tell you what I think, and I want you to go and have a look at it and talk with God about it. But there are so many teachings out there. They throw you into muddied water, a bit like the river at the moment when it's been raining. And there's a lot of ideas of Jesus plus. Jesus plus works equals salvation, or Jesus plus communion, or Jesus plus helping others, or Jesus plus whatever it is. Jesus plus being a good person. But knowing our foundations and being aware of those things that we don't necessarily look for in our lives, that might just creep in there, and knowing where Jesus is leading us individually is very, very important. And sometimes that means being unashamed of who we are, even though we kind of naturally might feel a bit ashamed or embarrassed about it. In the context of the church emerging, we have these various community engagement things happening, pantry, playgroup, all those kind of things. But we, as a leadership, when I say we, as a leadership and as a church, we're aware that just meeting a physical or an emotional need does not introduce people to Jesus necessarily. It may be a stepping stone to a conversation, but meeting that physical need is not the reason why we do it. No, we do not have hidden agendas. So many church programs have hidden agendas. Come in, we'll give you this, but then you have to do this. There's no hidden agendas in what we're doing, but we are also not afraid to say who we are, and we're not afraid to say what we believe. It's the idea that our foundations lead our actions while being vigilant in our awareness of changing priorities. Does that make sense? I'll say it again. Our foundations lead our actions while we continue to be vigilant in our awareness of changing priorities. If you can grab that, sermon's done. But that is essentially how the church needs to emerge from the past 2.5 years. But I also wonder, I mentioned that because this is about how the church emerges, but obviously this is very much about us individually too. I also wonder how in our own lives and in our own hearts, what might be the laws or the traditions or the religions or the histories or the practices we've always done that we try to press onto others, like the Jewish people did in Galatia. What are those things that we go, this is what you should be doing? Things might be things like church attendance. If you believe in Jesus, you have to be at church every week. Things like taking communion. If you don't take communion, that means you're not a Christian. Confession, I didn't take it this morning. I was too busy. My heart wasn't in the right place. Sorry. Does that mean I'm not a Christian? Life choices. Do we lift these outward things up as priorities over the acceptance of the gospel? Now, don't get me wrong. These things are not bad things to do. It's not bad to have communion, okay? So you're in the clear. It's okay. It's not bad to do communion. It's not bad to attend church. It's not bad to make life choices, good life choices. But the question is, do we expect or prefer the outworkings in our life over the acceptance of the true gospel? Do we prefer the outworkings over the acceptance in the first place? I'm getting a few blank looks. I get it. Sometimes we want to look at how a good or a moral person is, how good or how moral a person is, rather than their relationship with Jesus. And there's two realities in that. The first reality is that life change comes from a relationship. Sorry, I'm tired. Life change comes from a relationship with Jesus. Would you agree with that? Okay, not the other way around. You might be a good person, doesn't mean you know Jesus. The second point is when we look at life changes or behaviors or those things that we put so much importance on as the priority, then that is when we can become judgmental and elevate ourselves higher than others, even if it's in our own mind. But the reality is, we all sin, yeah? And sin is sin, no matter the type of sin. And so my experience is that we can all find this shift in ourselves at some point. Hence why my message is entitled Vigilance. We need to be vigilant about where our hearts and where our minds are at. We need to be aware of what we are not... Sorry, I'm going to have to read this. We need to be aware of what we are not looking for in our faith journeys. Does that make sense to you? We've got to be aware of those things that are slipping through the things that we don't necessarily know about ourselves. And when we find ourselves in this situation of prioritizing other outworkings rather than just the gospel, it doesn't mean that we're worse than anyone else either. Because as we read on, we see how the Apostle Peter, one of the guys who was following Jesus around for 3 years, one of the big 11? Because one of them wasn't great. He falls into the trap himself. This is in verse 11 to 13. He says, "But when Peter came to Antioch, I had to oppose him to his face, for what he did was very wrong. When he first arrived, he ate with the Gentile believers who were not circumcised. But afterward, when some friends of James's came, Peter would not eat with the Gentiles anymore. He was afraid of criticism from these people who insisted on the necessity of circumcision. And as a result, other Jewish believers followed Peter's hypocrisy, and even Barnabas was led astray by their hypocrisy." So Peter very quickly returned to, you can either say he returned to his elitism, if you like, but he also returned to his comfort zone. Pretty much because of what his mates would think of him. He was happy to mix with the riffraff until the A team arrived, or the J team, the Jewish team. And then, as soon as they arrived, he left the riffraff, and as a leader, others followed his example. And see, everything that we do affects others around us. If we become judgmental because we're going, you don't do this, you don't do that, then others can become judgmental too, because they might go, well, I respect that person, and if they're doing it, it must be right. At the very least, other people that we might be being judgmental to can then make a right or wrong call about what someone who believes in Jesus is like. They might go, well, I can only be friends with them when it suits them, or when I do things right. They'll only talk to me when I attend church or when I talk about God stuff. Do they really care about me? Oh, these Christians. We see where we start spiraling. See, as a Jesus follower, everything you do impacts other people's thoughts about Jesus. People see if we as a church engage with new people or new social groups, or if we just want to stay in our own little pockets. People see everything we do. And yes, of course we make mistakes. I'm not telling you to be perfect. But it's how we go about rectifying and owning and processing those mistakes that affects others. There's so many people I know that have said to me before, I heard that you stuffed up and you owned it and apologized for it. And I respect that. Rather than just running and hiding because I was too ashamed or whatever. So for me, I want to be an integrated church community and an integrated individual who is the same person wherever I am and whoever I'm speaking to. The reality is that's hard. But that's how I personally want to emerge into the future, and that's how I'd love to see the church emerge into the future. That the church is who they are, and they're not apologizing for what they believe in, but they can be that person in any scenario. But then Paul continues his tirade against Peter for the next few verses, and always points him back to the foundations. And this is how it's translated in the Message version. He says, we Jews know that we have no advantage of birth over the non-Jewish sinners. We know very well that we are not set right with God by rule keeping, but only through personal faith in Jesus Christ. And how do we know? Because we tried it. And we had the best system of rules the world has ever seen. But convinced that no human being can please God by self-improvement, we believed in Jesus as the Messiah so that we might be set right before God by trusting in the Messiah, not by trying to be good. All the things that we might like to judge people on, all the rules, all the good life choices, all the histories, all the traditions, it's all just trying to be good. And again, there's nothing wrong with trying to be good, but it's where it sits in our priorities in our lives. The goodness of God is not dependent on our good choices. It is about His grace and His desire to know people. And so sometimes our trying to be good, I'm not saying don't try to be good, but our trying to be good can actually become a little bit more harmful in our lives and in others' lives as well, when that becoming or doing good becomes the main thing. Paul says in verse 18 to 19, he says, rather, I am a sinner if I rebuild the old system of law that I already tore down. For when I tried to keep the law, it condemned me. So I died to the law. I stopped trying to meet all its requirements so that I might live for God. We cannot live for the law and for God. Can't do it. Sorry. We cannot just try to be good all the time. It's about our relationship with Jesus. Our focus strays away, if our focus strays away from the foundation principles of our faith and the focus becomes the lifestyle, then we're no better off than anyone else. Like he says, I'm a sinner if I rebuild what I go back to. We might wake up one day and not know how we got where we are. The things that we weren't looking for, or the things that we weren't necessarily aware of, like our moonwalking bears, We might wake up and they've actually overridden our priorities and overridden our focus. We might wake up on a Sunday morning and go, oh, I've got to go to church, rather than, thank you, Jesus, for what you did for me. And as a response to that, I want to go to church. And that's not just individually, that goes for the church community as well. The 4,000-mile-long Great Wall of China was built to keep out invaders from the north. The first wall was constructed by this guy, Shi Huangdi, the first emperor of China, who lived between 259 and 210 BC. But in AD 1644, the Manchus broke through the Great Wall and overran China. They did this by bribing a general of the Ming dynasty to open the gates. See, it doesn't matter how big or strong we think our faith walls are. If we are not vigilant with our generals, those things being our foundations or our life choices and all the things that we've spoken about today, and we don't put our generals in the right places or in the right order, in the places that they belong in our lives, then that's when the gates can open and anything can come flooding in. And then all of a sudden we look up and we're not exactly sure how we got where we are. So yes, as a church, we recognize that what we do affects others and that we need to be aware of what might creep in as priorities as we emerge into the future. And we need to make sure that we keep the foundations as the main thing. But over this week, I wonder if you can stop and look around you and perhaps see where you what might have crept in under your radar. Maybe ask yourself how you got to that spot that you're believing that thing. Ask yourself, why is this thing, whatever it is, why is it so important in comparison to Jesus? Essentially, I'm asking you, what's your moonwalking bear? The thing that you didn't notice that's all of a sudden popped up because you've heard something today maybe. So what is your unnoticed tradition? What is your unnoticed history, your practice, the thing that you believe everyone should be doing to be known as a believer of Jesus? And once you identify it, then I need you to ask yourself if you're going to respond like Peter or you're going to respond like Paul. Are you going to let it control your actions? Or are you going to call it out and put it back where it belongs in the wall? Let's pray together. God, again, we thank you for today. We thank you that we could be here. We thank you for what you did on the cross. God, I just ask that you will impress on each one of us the importance of the foundations of our faith, the importance of coming to you every day, being appreciative, just coming in worship and being thankful. Help us to recognize or bring to the surface for us some of those things that we might have let creep into going, people that believe in Jesus should be doing this. Reveal our shoulds to us so that we can, again, put them in their place and focus on our relationship with you, and let the life change flow from that. Show us our dancing bears, God. Amen. Is there a song now, or is this? Not yet.